It seems inevitable that the vast majority of champions in mixed martial arts will at one point or another be accused of ducking a challenger by fans.
Aiden, will you defend your belt against Aspinall, who has the interim title?
More than likely not. Legacy worth it, it would be Alex Pereira.
It's just textbook ducking. It cannot be anything else.
You know, I'm afraid of this guy or I'm afraid of that guy, and I'm not afraid of no man. I know Chuck Liddell's a puppet, man, and I like Chuck. I like Chuck a lot. You know, I think he's really done the hard work for literally no money.
It's a tale as old as Rocky III. There's always a Mr. T around the corner who is not getting the shot they deserve. And while a lot of times the idea that a champion is ducking is entirely unwarranted and just angry fan outcry, every once in a while, there's a very strong case that that is exactly what the champion is doing. And so I thought it would be fun to take a trip down memory lane and give you a chronological breakdown of every time a UFC champion ducked a title challenger. Before we get started, a quick and massive shout to our channel Hall of Famers for all their support. Alright, so the best place to start is obviously at the beginning. Tito Ortiz is very likely the first example in mixed martial arts history of a major promotional champion refusing to fight a specific contender, and it forced the UFC into a first as well. During his historic run, good buddy and sometimes training partner Chuck Liddell beat Vitor Belfort in a big high-profile cable TV main event that was to secure the #1 contender spot at 205. The win marked the Rising Star's 6th straight in the UFC, and afterwards in the cage, Ortiz, who was wearing his championship belt backwards, I have to admit that's actually pretty cool,
that's really cool,
was all about fighting Liddell after his upcoming bout with Ken Shamrock.
But after that, it'll be me and Chuck. So I just get a little warm-up fight with the old Ken Shamrock.
The UFC was more than willing to have Chuck wait for his earned shot, but he is insane, and so as the co-main event under Tito versus Ken, the Iceman KO'd Renato Sobral in 3 minutes, even more solidifying that he was the next great threat to Ortiz's reign and the very obvious #1 contender, so long as Tito defeated Shamrock, which he did. But the champion's tone had changed entirely in his post-fight interview.
I guess we gotta renegotiate things, because me and Chuck, our friendship's not worth the money we're getting paid, if you ask me.
Fans turned on the champion, believing that he was simply scared to fight the Iceman, and that it had nothing to do with the money. It certainly had something to do with the money. Whether Ortiz was scared of losing to Liddell as well as has been suggested by the UFC at times is up for debate. Wherever you fall on it though, Tito was unwilling to fight Chuck, and this period of stalling would last 7 months before the UFC decided to put pressure on Ortiz by, for the first time ever, making an interim title fight. Liddell would take on Randy Couture for that interim gold, but Couture would win, and as a result, Ortiz would get back in the cage and end up losing his title. Randy Couture pretty much ruined everything. With no more leverage, Tito would finally fight Liddell a whole year and a half after his first refusals and end up KO'd in the second round. While the whole situation would follow Ortiz his entire career, in part because of his continued rivalry with Liddell and at times Dana White, it wasn't the defining moment of his legacy. The same probably cannot be said for Germaine De Randamie, at least in mixed martial arts. The Iron Lady will be remembered in kickboxing for her dominance, no doubt, but sadly her legacy is going to be largely focused on her refusal to give Chris Cyborg an opportunity to fight for her featherweight title when it comes to her time in the UFC. The division, which was historically thinner than Christian Bale in The Machinist from inception to shelving, was literally made for Cyborg. After the promotion signed her in early 2015, the hope was that Chris would compete at bantamweight and have a big old mega fight with Ronda Rousey, who, pertinent to this video, was accused by Cyborg and fans of moving to bantamweight early in her career so as to avoid having to fight Chris.
Stop taking fucking steroids and make weight.
But 2 catchweight test bouts at 140 pounds later, and with Rousey having dropped the bantamweight title, the UFC said, fuck it, let's just give Cyborg her own division. Ready to move quickly, the promotion offered multiple dates for Chris to kick off women's featherweight, but she was still recovering from the cut to 140 and needed a slightly later date. The UFC said, nah, that's cool, we'll just do it without you, even though the whole point of this division was to highlight your stardom. And so De Randamie would take on Holly Holm for the inaugural gold. The fight was hugely controversial as GDR would land major shots after the horn several times during the bout on her way to victory.
Take a point away!
He's got to.
With the win, the very obvious first defense was against Cyborg, but De Randamie refused, as if she didn't know that the division was literally made just for Chris. Citing Cyborg's 2011 PED failure as her reasoning for ducking, the UFC stripped the new champion 128 days after she won the belt, and Chris would go on to win the vacant gold against Tanya Evinger. Funny enough, the kickoff of the women's flyweight division would have a similar situation with inaugural champion Nico Montano. Montano's UFC debut was her TUF 26 finale victory for for the gold, a feat she accomplished with a broken foot coming into the fight. Unable to train in the months after the win, the pressure was already on to grant the far more established Valentina Shevchenko the first title challenge in the division. But a long bout of undiagnosed tonsillitis after her foot healed would require surgery and more time off, further delaying the fight. Feeling the UFC would strip her if she didn't make the date they wanted, Montano agreed to fight Val in a time frame she knew was unrealistic, given both her time off from training because of her foot and the tonsillitis, and how badly her body had responded to the 4 weight cuts for TUF.
And I will be ready for this date, and I hope that Nico, she will follow her word and will show up in the octagon and we will fight, because how I say every time, before she will be inside of the octagon, I cannot believe that she will do it.
As a result, Nico showed up on fight week 144 pounds and subsequently redlined her kidneys during her weight cut, forcing hospitalization. She'd find out on Instagram that the UFC had stripped her of her title. So where is the ducking in all this? Well, the popular Shevchenko claimed on social media and in interviews that not only did she know that this was going to happen because she believed Montano was scared to fight her and looking for a way out, but that she'd actually trained 3 separate times for this fight, with Montano backing out each and every time.
I think it was her plan from very beginning to try to find the reason to avoid this fight.
Now, it should be noted that their fight was only ever announced officially the one time, so if it was made 2 other times, nobody was told publicly. Montano has denied any bout agreement ever being made but the one that she was stripped for, so it's really a case of she said, she said. Whether it was just horrible medical luck for Montano or actual ducking, we'll never truly know, but because she was stripped and because of Valentina's harsh words, the perception will forever be that Montano was ducking the bullet. While the 3 fighters we've discussed so far were heavily vilified for their ducking, Michael Bisping somehow managed to avoid this almost entirely when looked at in hindsight, despite probably being the most blatant ducker in this video. People were mad at the time, but nobody talks about it anymore. In case you forgot, the Count took the middleweight strap away from Luke Rockhold in one of the biggest upsets of all time, and then never again fought a single top contender, but instead got 2 gifts for defenses in the form of a hometown rivalry bout with the retiring number 13 ranked Dan Henderson, which Bisping specifically requested, and an absolutely massive MSG headlining bout against the returning Georges St. Pierre, who hadn't been in the cage for 4 years, up 15 pounds. Another bout he specifically asked for as well. He was actually angling for that fight in the lead up to the Henderson bout at UFC 204. 206 needed a headliner, and Bisping publicly challenged GSP, who had recently announced he was returning. The UFC actually offered this fight to St. Pierre, but it stalled at the negotiating table. Given 206 had fallen entirely apart, fans were hopeful that Mike would still be up for saving the date against number 3 Jacare Souza, but he suddenly needed to heal his orbital, and straight up admitted on UFC Tonight he'd have been willing to risk it for GSP, but not for Jacare. Bisping wouldn't be done ducking contenders though, oh no, as he would suddenly need to deal with a nagging knee injury when, during the long on and off again saga with St. Pierre before the bout finally came together, he skirted a fight with absolute monster number 1 contender Yoel Romero, forcing the promotion to make an interim title bout instead between Romero and Robert Whittaker. Bisping hilariously confronted Whittaker in the cage afterwards, as if he ever had any intention of fighting him. Mike would finally get his GSP fight and lose the title in dramatic fashion, setting up an all-time matchup for a unification bout between St. Pierre and Robert Whittaker, an all-time unification bout that we never got. Yes, this is the perfect transition into GSP's own alleged duckery. Just a month after winning the title off Bisping, St. Pierre vacated it citing a chronic condition called ulcerative colitis.
It came back that I have an ulcer inside my stomach. I relinquished it right away. I don't want to stall the division and make people wait.
Right. Colitis certainly sounds like no joke, but the timing of it couldn't have been more convenient given the perception of Whittaker as a matchup as opposed to Bisping, who was on his way out the door and an unlikely champion in the first place. When paired with St. Pierre's efforts only a few years later to set up a fight with Khabib Nurmagomedov at lightweight no less, a body transformation that would surely be impacted heavily by his condition, it does feel like GSP saw an opportunity in a weak champion in Bisping to take another title to add to his legacy, with no intention of ever defending it afterwards. Dana White has said that they only agreed to give him a title shot because he said he would defend.
Georges St. Pierre and I had a deal. He was going to fight Bisping at 185 pounds, and if he won, he would defend the title. He bailed on that. Didn't do it. So you can't just come out and handpick fights that you want for titles.
What if it wasn't for a title? What if it was 165? Something you'd be more apt to do?
I'm about to start beating my head off the concrete right now in about 2 seconds.
While the attempt at a fight with Khabib certainly doesn't help his case, St. Pierre wasn't diagnosed with colitis until after defeating Bisping, so it is possible that his initial reactions and the subsequent medication he was required to take made him feel like he was unable to compete, but then a few years later had better control of the condition and wanted to try for another big fight. Or, and hear me out, he was ducking Robert Whittaker so damn hard. The fact that Bisping isn't more often talked about for completely skirting those big fights today, as well as GSP, could be very much chalked up to their popularity. People don't want to say their favorite fighters are duckers. Look at the current Alex Pereira Magomed Ankalaev situation at light heavyweight.
There's no way. No, man.
Official rankings #1 Ankh is not popular with the fan base. Alex very much is. And look, I get it. Stone Man go big boom and dance. But it's hard not to compare this situation to the fan reaction over what's happening at heavyweight right now with Jon Jones. If you swap Magomed for a Tom Aspinall, I think a lot more fans are calling Poatan out for not demanding the fight be made. And funnily enough, I think fans would use the justification of the rankings to support the argument that Pereira is ducking Ankalaev, rather than what they're doing now, which is gleefully consuming Poatan versus #8 Khalil Roundtree, because that's more fun and the rankings only matter when it helps them argue for a fighter they actually like. The two parties continue to go back and forth as of this writing, with Poatan arguing that he requested the fight and that Ankalaev is the real ducker, something Magomed has denied, accusing Pereira of purposely avoiding him, blah blah blah, the same song and dance in any ducking situation. Alex has tried to defend himself by saying that fans know he wouldn't duck and that he fears no one. But here's the problem. Whether that's true or not, you cannot deny that Pereira has not had to be truly tested by someone with the skill set of Ankalaev at the top level. In fact, the vast majority of matchups have been nearly straight kickboxing. Whether that's the UFC protecting him or Alex leaning into the matchups he wants like a Michael Bisping, he can't be upset that some fans think he's ducking Magomed because his run does not have a fighter like Ankalaev in it. And the best possible way to shut people up about it would just to be to fight the guy. No greater advice could have been given to Jon Jones, who has found himself in such a strange place at the end of his career.
Jon Jones, he was praying that I would lose that fight against Curtis Blades, mate. Praying that I would. Since I won that fight, he's gone completely quiet, and he'll continue to go completely quiet about me until he retires, because there's no way on earth that he's going to fight me. I will retire Jon Jones without even fighting him.
This entire JBJ heavyweight saga has been nearly completely overshadowed by the fact that he's not fighting the best in the division. It goes all the way back to when he was still light heavyweight champion. Jones sat at the table with the UFC to negotiate a move up for a fight with then heavyweight contender Francis Ngannou, who had just destroyed Jairzinho Rozenstruik in 52 seconds. That's right, even back then people didn't want him to fight Stipe even though he was champ. The promotion claimed Jones asked for, quote, Deontay Wilder money for the bout during a difficult time for the promotion given the pandemic. They'd go on to make nearly $1 billion that year, but it sounded good at the time. John denied the Wilder money claim, and Dana challenged him to resolve things like a Maury Povich episode. Surprisingly, Jones did not take up White on his absurd offer, and that summer would announce he was vacating the light heavyweight title, with the understanding by all that eventually John was going to return, but at heavyweight when the time and the money was right. 6 months later, Ngannou would secure the title, and Jones would tweet afterwards his favorite quote from Jerry Maguire.
Show me the money.
When asked about the tweet at the post-fight presser, White did his best to stomp out any interest in the hyped bout.
If I'm Jon Jones and I'm home watching this fight, I start moving to 85.
After Ngannou fought out his contract and successfully defended his title, the UFC tried to entice him to stay in the promotion with the Jones fight. But Francis wanted to be allowed to box as well, among other things, and so he left and made way more money boxing than he ever did in the promotion. Good call. While White claims Ngannou didn't want to fight Jones, and before claimed Jones shouldn't have wanted to fight Ngannou, it really just sounds like both guys wanted more money for a really big fight, and the UFC couldn't be bothered. Which leads us to John actually ducking after winning the vacant title against Cyril Gane. An easy win, but one that immediately left Jones in a spot where fans wondered if he'd have beaten Ngannou, a guy many felt was still arguably the best heavyweight in the world. The shaky footing John started on got worse immediately when he called for a bout with Stipe Miocic after the victory, who, while #1 in the rankings, hadn't fought in 2 years. His last bout losing the title to Ngannou. Fans were hoping for a fight with the surging 17-1 with 14 knockouts #3 guy in the division, Sergey Pavlovich, and that sentiment only grew when he finished Curtis hardest blades in 3 minutes a month after Jon won the title. But 5 months later, the UFC would announce that Jones got his wish and that he'd be taking on everyone's favorite firefighter. Then things got really bad, because a week before the fight, Jones would tear his pec and sit on the title inactive for what's going on 378 days as I write this. 613 days if you look at it from when he won the title. In the meantime, a hero would emerge from Manchester named Tom Aspinall, who decimated big bad contender Pavlovich in 69 seconds, nice, to earn interim gold that he'd go on to defend in JBJ's absence, thus putting the most pressure on a champion to not duck a title contender we have ever seen. But Jones and the UFC have absolutely refused to do anything but the Stipe Miocic fight next, despite it not even being the fight people wanted the first time it was announced over a year ago. And in all likelihood, Jon will be retiring after that fight, leaving Aspinall ducked for all eternity. This one is on both the UFC and Jon Jones. If the promotion wanted the Miocic fight so badly, they could have stripped Jon in his long absence and did the Miocic fight. Everybody would have been okay with that, but they didn't. And if Jones only came up to win the title and have a legacy fight, he shouldn't have come at all, because being the champion means defending it against the next best guy, not the fight that makes you feel the best. The whole debacle has certainly soured what has been one of the weirdest chapters of his career, and that is saying something given some of the chapters this guy has had.
I just look at Tom as a very arrogant young man who hasn't proved much. He's using his mouth to even be mentioned in such a serious conversation.
And those are the most definitive ducks we could think of over the years. There's not been many with as strong a case as those. But by all means, feel free to share others you feel were true ducks down in the comments. I would love to hear about them. A massive thanks to Max Randall for crushing the edit on this video. Please follow him on his socials and check out his awesome YouTube channel. Another massive thanks to our channel Hall of Famers. You make looser structured videos like this one possible. Fight fans, hit the join button to join the Hall and get exclusive content and this special shout as well. Like and subscribe or I'll accuse you of ducking, and thanks so much for watching, guys. Enjoy the rest of your day.